The harsh fluorescent lights of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force's Lunar Deployment Center cast a sterile glow across the cavernous staging area. Rows of alien soldiers moved with practiced precision, their exotic exosuits glinting under the artificial illumination. And there stood Jake Rodriguez, human, lowest-ranked soldier, perpetual outsider. His standard-issue human combat suit looked almost comically outdated compared to the sleek, bio-integrated gear of his alien counterparts. The Krell taxa, with their iridescent exoskeletons and four-armed physiology, towered over him. The silicon-based Vornek soldiers moved with liquid grace, their crystalline bodies refracting light in hypnotic patterns. Even the methane-breathing Zornuk, who required specialized environmental suits, seemed more impressive than Jake's basic gray and white human uniform. "Inventory check, Rodriguez," barked Sergeant Krellax, a Krell taxa senior officer whose mandibles clicked with barely contained contempt. The alien's three eyes swept over Jake with a mixture of disgust and amusement. Jake's hands moved methodically, checking each piece of equipment with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Where others saw routine, he saw a complex system of interconnected components. His fingers traced the energy conduits of his communication array, noting microscopic variations that most would ignore. The other soldiers in the unit exchanged knowing glances. Humans were the newest addition to the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, and they were universally considered the least capable. Recruited more out of political necessity than actual combat potential, humans were typically assigned the most dangerous support roles. Cannon fodder in an interstellar conflict that predated their species' first steps into space. Jake knew the statistics by heart. Humans had the lowest survival rate in combined operations. Their technology was considered primitive, their physical capabilities minimal compared to other species. The Krell taxa could lift 10 times their body weight. The Vornek could survive in vacuum without protection. The Zornuk could regenerate lost limbs within hours. Humans, they'd brought nothing to the table, or so everyone believed. A small diagnostic tool slipped from Jake's hand, clattering against the metal floor. Sergeant Krellax's mandibles clicked in a sound Jake recognized as alien laughter. Typical human clumsiness, the sergeant muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. But Jake's hand had already moved, catching the tool before it could complete its fall. His reflexes were lightning quick, a trait he developed growing up in the overcrowded lower levels of New Santiago Colony. Survival there required constant awareness, split-second decisions. The diagnostic tool contained a custom modification Jake had developed. Where standard-issue equipment saw only surface-level data, his modifications allowed for deep system analysis. Most of his fellow soldiers saw it as unnecessary complexity. Jake saw it as essential understanding. "Something to report, Rodriguez," Krellax demanded, stepping closer. The alien's breath, a mixture of ammonia and something metallic, washed over Jake. "Microfluctuations in the primary communication grid, Sergeant," Jake responded, his voice calm and measured. "The latest patch from Central Command introduces a 0.03% signal degradation in long-range transmissions." The sergeant's three eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among the Krell taxa. "Impossible," he growled. "Our systems are perfect." Jake said nothing, simply rotating the diagnostic tool to display a series of complex graphs. Mathematical patterns danced across the small screen, evidence of the minute discrepancies he detected. Around him, the other soldiers continued their preparations. A group of Vornek soldiers practiced synchronized combat movements, their crystalline bodies moving like liquid mercury. Zornuk technicians ran system checks on their environmental suits, the methane inside creating a shimmer effect that made them look almost translucent. And in the middle of this interstellar melting pot stood Jake Rodriguez, lowest ranked, most overlooked, completely underestimated. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to change everything. The staging area hummed with pre-mission tension. Equipment checks continued. Soldiers checked weapons. Commanders reviewed mission parameters, And somewhere in the complex mathematical patterns of his diagnostic tool, Jake Rodriguez was about to discover something that would shake the foundations of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. But for now, he was just another human. Just another low-ranked soldier. Just another piece of equipment waiting to be deployed. Just wait. The drop shuttle vibrated with an ominous rhythm as it plummeted through Sigma-9's toxic atmosphere. Jake Rodriguez sat wedged between a Vornik crystal soldier and a Zornuk environmental specialist, feeling smaller than ever. The mission briefing echoed in his mind. A suicide run that nobody expected anyone to survive. Sigma-9 was legendary among interstellar military units, a planet of silicon storms, caustic winds, and electromagnetic interference that could fry most advanced technological systems within minutes. The last 3 reconnaissance teams had disappeared without a trace. No communications, no distress signals, nothing. 30 seconds to drop, announced the shuttle's AI in a flat, emotionless tone. Around Jake, seasoned soldiers checked their equipment with mechanical precision. The Vornik soldier to his left, a crystalline being named Kazril, adjusted quantum stabilization nodes along his exoskeleton. The Zornuk, called Breath of Storms, ran a final diagnostic on his methane filtration system. Jake's fingers moved almost unconsciously, running a custom diagnostic on his communication array. The tool he'd modified back in the lunar staging area now hummed with a soft blue light, picking up subtle electromagnetic variations that others missed. "Something's wrong," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Kazril's crystalline head turned, fractal eyes catching the shuttle's interior lights. "What did you say, human?" Jake hesitated. Speaking up had never worked well for him before, but something felt different this time. "The electromagnetic spectrum is behaving irregularly. These readings don't match any standard planetary interference patterns." A burst of harsh laughter came from Sergeant Krelax, who stood at the shuttle's command station. "Rodriguez thinks he's found something," the Krell Taxa sergeant announced, mandibles clicking in derision. "Listen, everyone. Our lowest-ranked soldier has discovered something our advanced sensors missed." The other soldiers joined in the laughter. Breath of Storms gave a gurgling sound that Jake recognized as the Zornuk equivalent of mockery. But Kazril remained silent, studying the diagnostic display Jake had pulled up. The crystal soldier's refraction patterns shifted, a sign of deep contemplation among his species. "Prepare for atmospheric entry," the AI announced. "Protective shields at maximum capacity." The shuttle began to shake violently. Outside the reinforced viewports, silicon particles began to crash against the hull like razor-sharp rain. Winds that could slice through standard military-grade armor buffeted the craft. Jake watched his diagnostic tool. The electromagnetic readings were definitely strange. Patterns that shouldn't exist. Interference that defied known physical laws. 5 seconds to landing zone, the AI continued. "Recommend full environmental protection." Sudden silence fell over the shuttle. Even the mockery stopped. Then everything went wrong. A massive electromagnetic pulse ripped through the shuttle's systems. Protective shields flickered and died. Technological systems began to fail one by one. The AI's voice became a garbled mess of static and incomprehensible sounds. "Brace for impact," Sergeant Krelax shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The shuttle plummeted. Jake's training kicked in. While others panicked, he began systematically protecting critical equipment. His hands moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. Quantum stabilizers, communication arrays, emergency beacon protocols. They crashed. Silence. Then a soft groan broke the stillness. Jake opened his eyes. The shuttle's interior was a mess of twisted metal and shattered technological components. Most of the advanced alien equipment lay in ruins, but Jake's modified diagnostic tool still blinked with a soft blue light. Around him, bodies moved. Some alien soldiers were alive. Most were not. Kazril's crystalline form shifted, reforming where the crash had momentarily shattered him. Breath of Storms pulled himself from a tangle of environmental suit fragments. Sergeant Krulax lay motionless. "We're not where we were supposed to land," Kazriel said, his fractal eyes scanning the alien landscape. Silicon storms raged outside. Electromagnetic interference created visual distortions that made the horizon seem to shift and breathe. Jake's diagnostic tool continued its soft blue pulse. Something was very wrong with this planet. Something beyond standard military understanding. And they were about to find out exactly what that something was. The silicon storm raged outside like a living nightmare. Razor-sharp particles hammered against the shuttle's compromised hull, creating a sound like millions of tiny knives scraping against metal. Inside, the survivors took stock of their situation. Jake Rodriguez moved with a calculated efficiency that surprised even himself. Where panic might have consumed others, he saw the crash site as a complex system of resources and potential solutions. The shuttle's wreckage wasn't just debris. It was a toolkit waiting to be understood. Kazriel, the Vornik crystal soldier, had partially reformed his body. Fractal connections rebuilt themselves with a mesmerizing fluidity, but deep fissures still marked his crystalline structure. Breath of Storms, the Zornuk environmental specialist, struggled with a damaged methane filtration system that was critical to his survival. "We've got 48 hours, Kazriel announced, his fractal eyes calculating. "Maximum. Before the environmental conditions become terminal." Jake was already working. His hands moved across the shuttle's damaged systems, pulling apart communication arrays, repurposing power cells, creating something entirely new from the wreckage. Most soldiers would have seen destroyed equipment. Jake saw potential. "We need to create a unified environmental shield," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. Breath of Storms gurgled a response that translated roughly to skepticism. "Impossible. Our most advanced systems failed within minutes of planetary entry." Jake didn't look up. His fingers continued their intricate dance across fractured technological components. "Not impossible. Just requires a different approach." The remaining soldiers watched with a mixture of confusion and mounting desperation. Two Krell Taxa combat specialists, brothers named Zax and Vorn, checked their weapon systems. Both had survived the crash with minimal injuries, their exoskeletons providing remarkable protection. A sudden movement outside caught everyone's attention. Something moved through the silicon storm, not a natural phenomenon. Something deliberate, calculated. "Contact," Zax shouted, raising his pulse rifle. Jake's hand shot out. "Wait." The other soldiers looked at him. The lowest-ranked human. The one they'd mocked countless times before. "The movement pattern," Jake said, his eyes fixed on the external sensor readings. "It's not random. It's systematic." Kazriel's fractal patterns shifted, the Vornik equivalent of intense concentration. "He's right. Those are not natural movements." Something was hunting them. Jake began reconstructing the shuttle's sensor array using components never meant to work together. A cooling system became a signal amplifier. A damaged communication array transformed into an early warning network. Where standard military doctrine saw limitations, Jake saw opportunities. Breath of Storms watched in fascination as Jake worked. The Zornuk was experiencing something unprecedented, a human displaying problem-solving skills that defied their understanding. The silicon storm intensified. Outside, the mysterious movement continued. Shadows shifted. Patterns emerged that shouldn't exist in any known biological or mechanical framework. "We're being studied," Jake said quietly. "Whatever is out there, it's not attacking. It's analyzing." Vorn, one of the Krell Taxa soldiers, clicked his mandibles in frustration. "Analysis. We're trapped in a death zone, and you think something is studying us." Jake's modified sensor array suddenly came to life. A complex network of repurposed equipment began collecting data that no standard military system could process. Electromagnetic variations, quantum-level interactions, patterns within patterns. "Not just studying," Jake corrected. "Calculating." The temperature inside the shuttle dropped. The silicon storm outside seemed to pause, as if taking a collective breath. Something was coming. Kazril's crystal body tensed. Breath of Storms activated emergency defensive protocols. The Krell-Taxa brothers checked their weapons. Jake continued working. Because survival wasn't about having the best equipment. It was about understanding the system. Adapting. Changing the rules of engagement. And nobody understood systems quite like Jake Rodriguez. The first tendril of something alien began to seep through a microscopic crack in the shuttle's hull. The real mission was about to begin. The alien presence continued its methodical investigation. Jake's improvised sensor network captured data that defied conventional understanding. Each millisecond revealed new layers of complexity that pushed the boundaries of known scientific principles. "This isn't a standard biological or mechanical system," Jake muttered, his fingers dancing across repurposed communication arrays. Kazril watched with growing fascination. The Vornik crystal soldier's fractal eyes captured light in impossible patterns, reflecting Jake's work from multiple angles simultaneously. "Explain," he demanded. Jake pulled up a holographic display constructed from salvaged shuttle components. Electromagnetic patterns danced in three-dimensional space, a complex web of interactions that seemed to breathe with an almost living intelligence. "Whatever is out there," Jake said, "it's not just a threat. It's a system, an adaptive network that learns and responds faster than any known technological framework." Breath of Storms gurgled a translation of his increasingly labored breathing. The Zornuk's methane filtration system was failing, creating an additional layer of urgency to their situation. The shuttle's compromised hull continued to crackle with microscopic breaches. Silicon particles danced just beyond their makeshift defenses, creating an almost hypnotic pattern of destruction and renewal. Zax, one of the Krell-Taxa combat specialists, checked his weapon systems for the 100th time. "We need a plan," he clicked, mandibles vibrating with tension. Jake's mind raced. The sensor network was revealing something impossible. The environmental threat wasn't random. It was calculating, learning, adapting with each moment of observation. "This is beyond any known technological framework," Kazril observed, his crystalline body refracting the holographic display in mesmerizing patterns. A sudden surge of electromagnetic interference caused the improvised sensor array to flicker. For a split second, Jake caught a glimpse of something profound. A pattern within the chaos, a system within the destruction. "It's a distributed intelligence," he said quietly, "not a single entity. A network that thinks like a living organism." The other soldiers looked at him. The lowest-ranked human. The one they'd always overlooked. Outside, the silicon storm intensified. Vorn, the second Krell-Taxa specialist, moved closer to the improvised sensor display. "Explain," he demanded, mandibles clicking with a mixture of frustration and growing respect. Jake's fingers moved across the holographic interface. Layers of data began to peel back, revealing a complex ecosystem of technological interactions. "This planet isn't just a location," he said. "It's a massive computational system. Every silicon particle, every electromagnetic wave, they're all part of a single adaptive network." Breath of Storm's environmental suit began to fail. The Zornuk's breathing became increasingly labored. "We need to move," Zax announced. "Our position is compromised." But Jake was barely listening. His mind had entered a state of hyperfocus. The sensor network revealed deeper layers of complexity with each passing moment. This wasn't just a planetary defense system. It was something far more profound. A living network. An intelligence that existed beyond traditional understanding. "It's studying us," Jake said, "but not like we would study an enemy. More like how a complex system analyzes input." Kazril's fractal patterns shifted. "Explaining," he demanded again. Jake pulled up another layer of data. Electromagnetic patterns danced. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in beautiful, terrifying complexity. "We're not just under attack," Jake said. "We're being processed, analyzed. our every movement, our every technological interaction. It's learning from us. The shuttle's hull began to crack more significantly. Silicon particles found new ways to penetrate their defenses. Something was coming, and they were running out of time. Jake's modified sensor array continued its impossible task: capturing, analyzing, understanding. Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting. It's about understanding the system. Survival demanded innovation. Jake Rodriguez understood this better than anyone. The shuttle's remnants had become something entirely new, a hybrid defensive system that defied military engineering principles. Casriel watched in fascination as Jake transformed damaged components into a network defense grid that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. "We cannot simply defend," Jake explained, his hands moving with surgical precision. "We need to become part of the system to understand it." Breath of Storms, his methane filtration system failing, gurgled a translation of skepticism. The Zornuk's environmental suit crackled with energy, each moment bringing him closer to a critical systems failure. Zax and Vorn, the Krell Taxa combat specialists, exchanged a look of growing respect. The human they had mocked was now their only hope of survival. Jake's modified sensor network continued to capture impossible data. The planetary environment wasn't just a threat. It was a living, calculating system that processed information faster than any known technological framework. Each moment revealed new layers of complexity. "We're approaching this wrong," Jake muttered, pulling apart a communication array and reconfiguring its quantum stabilization nodes. "Traditional defensive strategies won't work." Casriel's fractal body shifted, creating intricate light patterns that reflected Jake's rapid problem-solving. "Explain," the Vornek soldier demanded. Jake projected a holographic display that danced with electromagnetic patterns. "This planet is a computational network. Every silicon particle, every electromagnetic wave. They're interconnected in ways we've never seen before." The shuttle's hull continued to deteriorate. Silicon storms raged outside, finding new ways to penetrate their makeshift defenses. Time was running out. "Our primary objective," Jake continued, "is no longer simple survival. We need to communicate with the system." Vorn clicked his mandibles in frustration. Communicate with a planetary defense network. But Jake was already working. His hands moved with a speed and precision that seemed to defy human limitations. Communication arrays merged with quantum stabilization systems. Damaged power cells became complex signal generators. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," he said. "We're not trying to fight or defend. We're trying to understand." Breath of Storm's environmental suit began to fail more rapidly. The Zornuk's breathing became labored, each breath a struggle against the hostile environment. Zax checked his weapon systems. "We need a concrete plan," he insisted. The Krell Taxa's exoskeleton clicked with tension. Jake's improvised network began to pulse with a soft blue light. Electromagnetic patterns that should have been random began to form complex, deliberate sequences. "It's a language," Jake said quietly, "but not like any language we've ever seen before." Casriel's fractal body vibrated with an intensity that suggested deep contemplation. "How can you be certain?" Jake pulled up another layer of data. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in beautiful, terrifying complexity. "Because systems always communicate," he explained, "even when we don't understand the method." The shuttle's interior temperature began to drop. Silicon particles found new ways to penetrate their defenses, creating intricate patterns that seemed almost intentional. "We're being processed," Jake said. "Analyzed. Our every technological interaction is being studied." Vorn moved closer to the improvised sensor display. "And your plan is?" Jake's fingers danced across the holographic interface. "We become part of the system. We stop trying to survive against it and start trying to understand it." Breath of Storm's environmental suit gave a final desperate crackle. Something was coming. The planetary network was preparing something unprecedented. And Jake Rodriguez was the only one who might understand what was about to happen. Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting. It's about communication. It's about understanding. The blue light of Jake's network continued to pulse. Electromagnetic patterns danced. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in patterns of impossible beauty. Something was about to change. The moment of revelation came without warning. Jake's improvised communication network suddenly erupted with a cascade of information that defied every known principle of technological interaction. Electromagnetic patterns transformed into complex mathematical sequences that seemed to breathe with an almost organic intelligence. "This isn't just a defense system," Jake whispered, his eyes reflecting the intricate holographic displays dancing around him. "It's alive." Casual's crystalline body vibrated with an intensity that suggested both terror and fascination. The Vornek soldiers' fractal eyes captured light in impossible patterns, reflecting the expanding network of information. The planetary environment had become something entirely different. What had initially appeared to be a hostile silicon storm now revealed itself as a massive interconnected computational system. Every particle, every wave of electromagnetic energy. They were components of a single, unimaginably complex intelligence. Zax, one of the Krull taxa combat specialists, moved closer to Jake's improvised sensor array. "Explain," he demanded, mandibles clicking with a mixture of fear and growing respect. Jake's fingers moved across the holographic interface. Layers of data peeled back, revealing a complexity that challenged everything they understood about technological systems. "This planet is not just a location," he said. "It's a massive distributed intelligence. Every silicon particle is a processing unit. Every electromagnetic wave is a communication channel." Breath of Storms, his environmental suit barely functioning, gurgled a translation of growing understanding. The Zornuk soldier had become an unlikely witness to something unprecedented. The network continued to expand. What had started as a defensive system was revealing itself to be something far more profound. A living network that processed information in ways no known species had ever conceived. "It's studying us," Jake continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "but not like we would study an enemy. More like how a complex system analyzes input. We're not just under attack. We're being processed." "Understood." Vorn, the second Krull taxa specialist, moved closer to the display. His exoskeleton clicked with tension. "What does it want?" Jake's modified sensor network pulsed with a soft blue light. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in patterns of impossible beauty. "Communication," he said. "It wants to understand." The shuttle's compromised hull continued to deteriorate. Silicon particles found new ways to penetrate their defenses, creating intricate patterns that seemed almost intentional. But now, those patterns revealed themselves as something more. A language, a method of communication beyond traditional understanding. Casrol's fractal body shifted. "How can you be certain?" Jake pulled up another layer of data. Electromagnetic patterns danced in three-dimensional space, a complex web of interactions that seemed to breathe with an almost living intelligence. "Because every system communicates," he explained, "even when we don't understand the method." The planetary network was preparing something unprecedented. Zax checked his weapon systems, a reflexive action that now seemed almost laughably primitive. "We cannot fight this," he said quietly. Jake's network continued to pulse. Information flowed in patterns that defied conventional mathematical principles. The planetary system was learning, adapting, processing their every technological interaction with a speed and complexity that bordered on the miraculous. "We're witnessing something extraordinary," Jake said, "a form of intelligence that exists beyond our current understanding." Breath of Storm's failing environmental suit gave a final desperate crackle. The Zornuk soldier was becoming a silent witness to a moment that would change everything. The temperature inside the shuttle continued to drop. Silicon particles danced just beyond their failing defenses, creating an almost hypnotic pattern of destruction and renewal. Something was coming. The network was preparing to communicate, and Jake Rodriguez was the only one who might understand what was about to happen. Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting. It's about understanding. It's about communication. The blue light of Jake's network continued to pulse. Electromagnetic patterns danced. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in patterns of impossible beauty. A moment of profound transformation was approaching. The final confrontation began with absolute silence. Jake Rodriguez stood at the center of a technological maelstrom that defied every known principle of physics, communication, and survival. His improvised network pulsed with a living energy that transformed the shuttle's compromised hull into something between a defensive position and a communication device. "We're not fighting," Jake said quietly. "We're translating." The planetary network responded. Electromagnetic waves crashed against their position like living waves of pure information. Silicon particles outside began to reorganize, creating patterns that were simultaneously mathematical equations and living communication channels. Casriel's crystalline body refracted the incoming waves of data. The Vornek soldiers' fractal eyes captured light in impossible patterns, watching as Jake transformed their desperate survival situation into something unprecedented. Zax and Vorn, the Krull Taxa combat specialists, had stopped thinking like soldiers. They were now witnesses to a moment that would rewrite everything known about interstellar intelligence. "It's trying to understand us," Jake explained, his fingers dancing across an improvised holographic interface constructed from salvaged shuttle components. Not as enemies, not as threats, but as a new form of input. The planetary network's investigation reached a critical point. Waves of silicon particles began to form complex three-dimensional structures around their shuttle. What had seemed like a random environmental threat now revealed itself as a sophisticated communication attempt. Each particle moved with purpose. Each electromagnetic wave carried layers of information beyond human comprehension. Breath of Storms, his environmental suit failing, became a silent witness to the transformation. The Zornuk soldiers' labored breathing seemed to synchronize with the rhythmic pulses of Jake's network. "We're being translated," Jake said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Our entire technological signature, our biological systems, our method of perceiving reality." The shuttle's interior temperature dropped. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in patterns of impossible complexity. The planetary network was doing more than investigating. It was learning, adapting, understanding. Casriel's body vibrated with an intensity that suggested both terror and profound revelation. "What does it want?" the Vornek soldier asked. Jake's network pulsed with a soft blue light that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. "Communication," he responded. "Pure, unfiltered communication." The silicon storm outside transformed. No longer a destructive force, it became a living canvas of information. Mathematical equations danced. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in patterns that suggested a form of intelligence beyond traditional understanding. Zax checked his weapon systems, a reflexive action that now seemed impossibly primitive. "We cannot fight this," he said quietly. The planetary network continued its investigation. Every technological component, every biological system, every method of perceiving reality was being processed, analyzed, understood. "We're witnessing first contact," Jake said, "but not like anyone has ever conceived before." Vorn's exoskeleton clicked with tension. First contact usually involves ships, negotiations, protocols. Jake smiled. "This is different. We're not communicating with a species. We're communicating with a system." The shuttle's compromised hull began to transform. Silicon particles reorganized themselves, creating intricate communication interfaces that blended technological components with something that bordered on living intelligence. Breath of Storms gave a final desperate gurgle as his environmental suit reached critical failure. The moment of total transformation approached. Jake Rodriguez, the lowest-ranked soldier, the one everyone had overlooked, the one considered least capable, stood at the center of a moment that would change everything. Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting. It's about understanding. It's about communication. The blue light of Jake's network pulsed one final time. Electromagnetic patterns danced. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in patterns of impossible beauty. Something extraordinary was about to happen, and Jake Rodriguez was ready. The recovery team found them 3 standard galactic weeks later. Jake Rodriguez sat motionless, surrounded by technological remnants that defied every known scientific principle. Kazril's crystalline form remained partially merged with the shuttle's transformed hull. Zax and Vorn, the Krull taxa specialists, were suspended in a state between biological existence and something entirely new. Breath of Storms was gone. Transformed. Integrated. Report, demanded Commander Elena Rodriguez, Jake's elder sister and lead investigator for the Galactic Peacekeeping Force's Xenological Research Division. Jake's eyes focused, but they weren't the same eyes that had entered the mission. They reflected something deeper, something that had seen beyond the boundaries of known reality. Communication, he said simply. We were never under attack. We were being understood. The recovery shuttle sensors went haywire. Quantum interactions that should have been impossible danced across their displays. Technological systems responded to Jake's presence in ways that defied conventional understanding. Elena Rodriguez studied her brother, the lowest-ranked soldier, the one everyone had overlooked. Now the key to humanity's most significant discovery. Preliminary reports from the forensic team suggested something extraordinary. The planetary network on Sigma-9 was not a defensive system. It was a massive, distributed intelligence that processed information in ways no known species could comprehend. And Jake Rodriguez had become its first successful point of communication. What happened out there? Elena pressed. Jake's fingers moved almost unconsciously, creating complex holographic displays that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. We were analyzed, he explained, not as threats, not as enemies, but as a new form of input, a method of understanding reality. The Galactic Peacekeeping Force's highest-ranking xenological researchers gathered around the preliminary reports. The data challenged everything they thought they knew about interstellar intelligence. Kazril's partially merged form began to pulse with a soft light. The Vornek soldier was no longer entirely biological, no longer entirely technological, something in between. Zax and Vorn clicked their mandibles in a pattern that suggested profound transformation. The Krull taxa specialists had become something more than their original biological form. The planetary network, Jake continued, is a communication system. It doesn't attack. It understands. It processes. It learns. Elena studied the reports. Sensor readings showed impossible quantum interactions. Technological systems that responded to Jake's mere presence, a method of communication that went beyond language, beyond technology, beyond known scientific understanding. The lowest-ranked soldier had become humanity's most important discovery. Entire research divisions would be created to understand what had happened on Sigma-9. Teams would be assembled. Theories would be developed, but none would truly comprehend the profound transformation that had occurred. Jake Rodriguez had proven something fundamental about humanity. Their greatest strength was not in technology, not in military might, not in biological adaptation, but in the ability to communicate, to understand, to see beyond the boundaries of known reality. The recovery team continued their initial assessments. Technological systems responded to Jake's presence in ways that defied explanation. Quantum interactions danced across their sensors. Holographic displays formed and reformed with a living intelligence. We were never fighting, Jake said quietly. We were learning. Elena placed a hand on her brother's shoulder. The Jake who had entered the mission was gone. Transformed. Something more. Humanity's potential had just been rewritten. The lowest-ranked soldier had become its most important asset, and everything was about to change. The holographic displays continued to pulse. Quantum interactions revealed themselves in patterns of impossible beauty. A new understanding of reality was emerging. Jake Rodriguez smiled. Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting. It's about understanding. It's about communication.